I am ready to read chapter 12 of Mr. Popper's Penguins. I hope you've enjoyed this day. It's been kind of rainy and yucky, but it's also been kind of a nice day just to sit around and do some inside work. So I hope you've had some fun and had some fun things to do inside today while it's been raining. This chapter is called More Mouths to Feed. That makes me wonder what in the world, and I bet I can guess, can you, now that Greta has come, why there's going to be suddenly more mouths to feed. Here we go. So the next day, Mr. Popper called an engineer and had a large freezing plant installed in the cellar and took Captain Cook and Greta down there to live. Then he had the furnace taken out and moved upstairs into the living room. It looked very odd there, but as Mrs. Popper said, it was a relief, at least, not to have to wear their overcoats all the time. Mr. Popper was quite worried when he found that all these changes were going to be very expensive. The refrigerator engineer was worried too when he found out that Mr. Popper had practically no money. However, Mr. Popper promised to pay as soon as he could, and the man let him have everything on credit. It was a good thing that Mr. Popper got the penguins moved when he did, because Mrs. Popper had been right about the eggs. The rookery had scarcely been moved to the basement when Greta laid the first egg. 3 days later, a second one appeared. Since Mr. Popper knew that penguins only lay 2 eggs a season, he was astonished when a little later the third egg was found under Greta. I wonder how many eggs they're going to have. Whether the change in climate had changed the penguins' breeding habits, Mr. Popper never knew. But every third day, a new egg would appear until there were 10 eggs in all. Now, penguin eggs are so large that the mother can only sit on 2 at a time. This created quite a problem. Mr. Popper solved it, however, by distributing the extra eggs under hot water bottles and electric heating pads, and that were kept at penguin body heat. The penguin chicks, when they began to hatch, were not so handsomely marked as their mother and father. They were fuzzy, droll little creatures who grew at a tremendous rate. Captain Cook and Greta were kept very busy bringing food to them, though of course the Poppers all helped too. Mr. Popper, who had always been such a great reader, had no difficulty in thinking of names for the penguin children. They were Nelson, Columbus, Louisa, Jenny, Scott, Magellan, Adelina, Isabella, Ferdinand, and Victoria. Still, he was rather relieved that there were no more than 10 penguins to name. You see that little baby there? Mrs. Popper, too, thought that this was about enough penguins for anybody, though they really didn't make any difference to her in the housework as long as Mr. Popper and the children remembered to close the cellar door in the kitchen. The penguins all loved to climb the stairs that led up to the kitchen, and they never knew when to stop unless they found the kitchen door closed. Then, of course, they would just turn around and toboggan back down the steps again. This made a rather curious noise sometimes when Mrs. Popper was working in the kitchen, but she got used to it. And she had to get used to many other strange things this winter. The freezing plant that Mr. Popper had gotten for the penguins downstairs was a very large one and a very good one. It made very large blocks of ice instead of tiny little ice cubes, so that soon Mr. Popper had made sort of like an ice castle down there for the 12 penguins to live in and to climb over. Mr. Popper had also dug a large hole in the cellar floor, and he made a swimming pool and a diving pool for the birds. From time to time, he would even throw live fish into the pool for the penguins to dive for. They found this very refreshing because, to tell the truth, they'd gotten a little tired of canned shrimps. The live fish were specially ordered and were brought in all the way from the coast in tank cars and glass boxes to 432 Proudfoot Avenue. Unfortunately, these fish were quite expensive. It was nice that there were so many penguins, because when 2 of them, usually Nelson and Columbus, got into a fight and they would begin to spar at each other with their flippers, the 10 other penguins would all crowd around to watch the fight and to make encouraging remarks. This made a very interesting little scene. Mr. Popper also flooded part of the cellar floor to make an ice rink. And here, the penguins often drilled like a sort of little army in fantastic marching movements and parades around the ice. The penguin Louisa seemed especially fond of leading these little marching drills. It was quite a sight to see them. After Mr. Popper had the idea of training Louisa to hold a small American flag in her beak while she proudly led the solemn parades. Janie and Bill would often bring their little friends home from school with them, and they would all go downstairs and watch the penguins for hours. At night, instead of sitting and reading and smoking his pipe in the living room as he had done before, Mr. Popper would put on his overcoat and he would take his things downstairs. There he would sit and read with his mittens on, looking up from time to time to see what his pets were doing. He often thought about the cold, distant regions in which the creatures really did belong. Often, too, he thought how different his life had been before the penguins had come to keep him occupied. It was January now, and already he was dreading to think of the time when spring would come and he would have to leave them all day to go back to painting houses. And there's a picture of one of them. I don't know which one that is. There's no telling because they all look the same to me. All right, so that was chapter 12. The next is chapter 13, Money Worries. I will post it tomorrow. I talked to a lot of you today, and it was good to talk to you. If I didn't get a chance to talk to you today, I will call you in the next couple of days just to say, hey, I hope things are going well with everybody. Talk to you soon.